Masterful, engaging, empowering, and differentiated. These are just a couple of the words I took away from my conversation with David Kurkjian. David is the founder of MasterMessaging, a company where he focuses on helping sales leaders accelerate revenue through high-value conversations and prospecting. The challenge that many advisors face daily is growth, and David has proven an ability to help advisors and other industry leaders increase sales by innovating the way they communicate and talk about the value they provide. Leveraging experiences with large companies like Qwest Communications and the old Bellsouth, David utilizes experience in newly adopted behavioral psychology to help leaders become better salesmen and women. Today, David explores the ways to better communicate in an environment where communication will be a differentiator. David, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you coming down to the studio.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Good. And we were just talking before we started to record. Kurkjian is a name I know, not just from you, but also being a baseball enthusiast of Tim Kurkjian. And you mentioned that everybody asked you that question, so I'm not unique in this. But are you or are you not related to Tim Kurkjian?
No, they're both fairly well-known Armenian names. And my second cousin actually reached out to Tim several years ago. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. And was able to get him on the phone, spent 2 hours on the phone, and they could not figure out where our family lines had crossed. But yeah, typically it's from the baseball lovers in the room when I'm doing workshops. Somebody raises their hand and go, "Hey, are you related to Tim?" I'm like, no, no, I'd like to be able to. But very personable guy. Obviously, to spend 2 hours with a stranger trying to figure that out.
Right.
But no relation.
Are you a baseball enthusiast yourself? I mean, is it running the Kurkjian blood even though you may not be related?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I've lived in Atlanta since 1970, so I've been here for the good times, the bad times, the mediocre times. But my baseball enthusiasm comes really more from my two boys. So when they were growing up, my oldest son was a huge baseball fan. As a matter of fact, he's going to school now to get a master's degree in applied math and statistics because he wants to be the next Moneyball guy.
Nice.
When he figured out he wasn't good enough to actually play Major League, he's like, there's still an opportunity for me to be involved.
You know what? Where's he going to school for that?
NC State.
Okay. So we went to this offsite. It was like a learning experience up at MIT, and they have some professors up there that do the same thing. And so he came and talked to us about using data in sports and how teams can use data in a different way to gain an advantage. Moneyball, of course, is the example that we all know, but they looked at scenarios in terms of how they'll use data in soccer to make sure the speed of someone on a breakaway relative to the speed of other players can allow them to get an easier goal from that standpoint. And then the one that always stands out is the Warriors. This stuff really gets, because I'm a big sports guy and I like numbers. But the Warriors, when Steve Kerr came in to coach, he analyzed all their tapes to see why they were when they won, what happened, and when they lost, what happened. And what he identified is that when they won, they had 330 passes or more on average.
Wow.
And so what he said is that he just put up a number in the locker room. It was 330. This is the number that we have to reach every game. We have to get 330 passes every single game. They went on to win the championship that year. And now that data point, passes per game, is being monitored by all NBA teams because they want to say, if I can reduce the passes per game, then I can win more from that standpoint. And so I love that. I'm actually somewhat jealous of your son because I think that is an extremely interesting profession. So when's he get done with that?
Next spring. He finished classes next spring. So I've got some connections here in the Atlanta sports community, so hopefully we can get him connected with the Braves sooner than later.
That's great. Braves we always need help there. We got a good team now, but we can always use help there. Now the other thing I wanted to talk about real quick before we hop into the really, this is the interesting stuff. When we hop into kind of the boring stuff, I guess, is you said that you run barefoot on concrete, and so you're a big runner because you've done, I would call it competitively in the Peachtree, and then you run barefoot on concrete. So no shoes, not even like the shoes of like the barefoot shoes, just straight skin to concrete.
That's it. Yeah.
And how far do you run?
The furthest I've run barefoot is 8 miles.
8 miles. How do your feet look at the end of that?
Well, see, that's a common misconception. Actually, when I facilitate workshops, I actually kick off the workshop with my barefoot running story.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it was 6 years ago. I've been running my entire life. It's something that I do not only for the physical aspect, but for the mental aspect. If I've got a problem or a challenge or something I'm trying to work out either in my business or in my personal life, I find that when I'm running, I get the creative ideas and thoughts necessary to solve those problems. So had a soccer injury in my 20s, blew out my knee. Obviously, all those years of running, my knee has become arthritic. And so 6 years ago, I go to a orthopedic surgeon, and guess what he says? Knee replacement, right? And I look at him, I said, well, if I get a knee replacement, I can't run anymore. And he's like, well, you shouldn't be running. And so at the time, I read a book called Born to Run. And in the book, he makes a case for it's actually healthier to run without any shoes on your feet. As a matter of fact, that was the book that spurred the whole barefoot running industry, where they created the Vibram Five Fingers and all these other shoes. It came on the heels of the book, but what most people don't know is in the book, he says run completely barefoot. Don't put anything on your feet. So not to make this too long of a story, but the reason that I can run barefoot with an arthritic knee is that when you take your shoes off, your nerve endings in your feet act as a feedback loop for the right way to run from a posture standpoint. I was taught with these big Nike cushion pillows on my feet, I was taught to run heel to toe.
Yep.
Plant your heel and roll to the front part of your foot. Well, when you take your shoes off, you'll do that once and it'll be the last time you'll do it. Because you plant your heel on concrete, it hurts.
Right.
So you come down more on the front mid part of your foot. And when you do that, the shock goes into your foot and into your calf muscle. The shock doesn't hit your knee, your hips, or your back. So that's why I can run. And then the other thing, you asked about what does the bottom of my foot look like? So again, that's another misconception. You're running on concrete, which is like a pumice stone.
Right.
So I wouldn't say my feet are like baby fresh, but they look normal. They look like anybody else's. There's not these huge calluses that build up.
And I guess after you do it once, I mean, yeah, it just gets you. That's amazing. I would never even.
Well, so I go.
And
back.
also, you're on that. I guess on that part of that foot, and we're going to turn this into a running and a foot conversation. And when we start talking about feet, people are going to go away because my feet are not the best.
Right.
I'll admit that. But you're running on like a cushiony part of your foot too, right? Like that part of your foot is
the front pad.
Is a pad, so it's meant to be run. I mean, in theory, before people had shoes, they were doing the same thing.
Yeah. And look at your heel. Very little cushion.
Right. That's why it hurts when you go like that onto the concrete.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try it. I'm going to agree. I'm going to believe you and use your experience and live vicariously through you on that. I'm not much of a runner, but I'll take your word for it from that standpoint. Well, let's get. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think that the industry of financial advisors has always had a difficult time communicating value. And I think that, if you look at where this industry has gone over the past, call it 30 years, 30 years ago, the way that you differentiate yourself was I have a better investment strategy than you do.
Right.
Recently, it's kind of shifted to I do financial plan, and I'll look at your holistic plan together and put together this 5,000-page book for you. And and then now it's a matter of how do we differentiate ourselves going forward, and it's going to be through servicing value and services and a value, and that's always been a difficult thing for us to communicate. And I know that you've focused on all industries, but you've worked with financial advisors, so I think this is going to be an interesting conversation to help advisors with that communication. So I want to start on that, right?
Okay.
When you look at this wealth management industry, and when you work with firms in this space, what do you think that many financial advisors, wealth managers are missing when it comes to communicating with clients and prospects?
Yeah, so, it's not that much different. I know it's easy to pick on financial advisors because, the world can look at them as somewhat of a commoditized market, right? How are you different than another financial advisor? But you know what? That's playing out in the marketplace in general. What you've seen over the last 30 years is that companies used to hang their ability to sell on differentiating the product. So it was a faster product, it was a more efficiently made product, it had capabilities that another product didn't have. But for the most part now, we live in a commoditized world. I mean, look at all the choices that we have. And so with all of these choices, from a company standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, as far as communicating value, you really have to identify something unique or something different. And then the last frontier for actually communicating value, it's not around the product. It's in the way that you communicate with your prospects and customers. So there's a lot more emphasis on soft skills in all industries. It's coming down to the relationship between the seller and the buyer, and it's not so much the speeds and feeds and the technical advantages, and that's true in the financial services industry.
I want to dive down for a second into the comment you made about the way you communicate, right? Because I think that what hurts our industry at times is that you have a lot of smart people in the industry. Not to toot my own horn, but you have a lot of smart people in the industry, and they love to analyze the data. They love to analyze the economy. They love to analyze the numbers. Hence our conversation about data analytics and sports. And so they take that and they try to break that down and they want to talk about that. That's what they want to talk about to their client, but the client's like glossed over.
Right.
They don't want to deal with any of that.
Right.
And so it's the way you communicate, I think, and that's the what, but the way you communicate needs to be different. And what do you mean by that when you say the way you communicate? Because maybe you could communicate about that data, but if you communicate in a different way, it may be more impactful. I don't know.
Yeah, so I typically make this statement, and it's a categorical statement of your prospects and customers, and this is true in the financial services world. They don't care about what you do. They don't. And when you buy a product, you don't necessarily care about what the product does. You care about the outcome that product or service is going to create. So the mistake that is made in all industries, and certainly in the financial services industries, is that because you live in this world of numbers and complexity, you just feel like if I talk about that, that's going to win the day. If I just talk about the numbers and complexity. And to your point, no, people just gloss over. What they want to know is all that complexity, what can you do that's going to create an outcome for me that's better than an outcome that I can get anywhere else. So when you talk about a product or service, you really shouldn't be talking about the product or service. You should be talking about what it does for or the outcomes that you're going to create. And one of the questions that is great to ask for any business professional, before you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, just ask this question. How is that person going to be better off as a result of doing business with you? And what that does is that you can articulate, because the answer to that question is going to be an outcome. They'll be able to do this better, or they'll be able to do something that they haven't been able to do. They're going to be able to create an outcome that's going to make an impact or have value in their life. And you need to be able to answer that question without making any reference to what you do, right? So how are they going to, and it's interesting because I go to networking events all the time. And instead of asking somebody, hey, what do you do? I ask them that question. Hey, so tell me how your prospects are better off as a result of doing business. They look at me and they go, wow, that's a good question. I hear things like peace of mind. I hear things like security. I hear things like I free up more time for them to spend on things that are more important to them. And then I circle back to them and I go, wait, so you actually create more time for your prospects and customers? And they're like, yeah. And what happens is when they start talking about the outcome for their prospect or customer, they get more energized. Because to answer the question, who are you and what do you do? Well, I'm a financial advisor and I do this, this, and this. Most people, it just kind of rolls off their tongue. There's no passion behind it.
Yep.
But when you start talking about how you can make another human being's life better as a result of what you do, that has a whole lot of passion and energy to it. And that really is where you should start. What are the challenges that your constituency or your prospects or customers, what are the high-level challenges that they face? And then contrast that with how would their life be different? What can they do differently as a result of working with you?
Yeah. As you're talking through that about the outcome, right? How is their life going to be different by working with you, which doesn't have to do with anything with what you do, right? Gets to kind of, and I'm sure Simon Sinek and like the why, right?
Love
like,
it, yeah.
Well, it's not why do you do what you do because I love to invest money. That's not why you do what you do. You got to have a deeper why, right? And I love the example about Apple, and they never came out and said we build computers and they're great, right? That's not what they come out with. They come out and say, we're changing the world in the way that you interact with it. And, oh, by the way, we sell computers and phones and do all that, right? And it's a completely different message because it associates with, oh, yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to help? I want to help change the world, right? I want to be a part of that.
Right.
Whereas a lot of computer companies are like, well, I have a 256 gigabyte hard drive with this RAM, and everybody's like, I don't care. I have no
Right.
idea what's in my Apple. I just bought it because I like Apple, right? Like,
Right.
does it work? Yeah, it's great. I love the company, but the company didn't sell me on the computer. The company sold me on their vision, which is their why.
Well, I've got a great example of that. He was actually the first financial advisor I worked with. This would have been 5 or 6 years ago, just on the heels of launching MasterMessaging. And we sat down and I was having this same conversation. Why did you start? What was behind your impetus to start your financial advisor business? And he goes, my mom. And I'm going to get emotional just talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, what happened? He said, my dad died prematurely. It was, all of a sudden, and, she was left with, all these questions on, how do I manage my money and what do I do now? And I watched her as a young man struggle with all of these challenges that she was left with because my dad passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I made a decision, when he made the decision to go into the financial advisor world, he specifically wanted to do it to help divorcees and widowers, women that are being impacted by this dramatic life event that happens in their life, because he walked through that with his mother. He saw the emotional impact that it had on his mother. And so when he started building this business, we sat down and I was like, so you're going after a very specific niche in this industry, and you've got a really compelling why. And so here's how your messaging is going to play out that's going to tap into that why. But the reason that he has so much success is because he found something in himself that had passion and energy behind it, and he knew that he could make a difference with other women that are experiencing these same challenges. And so if you're a woman and you sit down and have a conversation with him, just like the Apple experience, that you're talking about, because they're so clear about their why, they feel that in the conversations that they have with him. It's part of the experience. And so he's able to cut through the noise in the financial advisor world and go after a very specific niche because he's so passionate about this why that he brings to it.
Yeah, and it changes the conversation so drastically. I mean, I see it in some of the firms that I've been a part of, is that, the clients that are attracted to you and see the why of your firm and the passion that you have, they're not the ones that come in and ask, well, what did my returns do today? What did my allocation do today? They say,
exactly.
Am I still going to be able to retire? Can I go travel to the world and do this? And it's a different conversation where you spend 95% of your time talking about them and their family and what they want and how they want to get there. And they don't care how you do it. They just want to say, am I going to be able to do it? And you say, yeah, okay. As opposed to you spending 95% of your time saying, well, here's your portfolio. This is why Apple is down, and this is why your allocation is this way. They don't give anything about that, right?
Yeah.
They care about getting to their why, and I think that's a messaging. And so I think that gets into my next question, right? It gets into, we're talking about it on a client side, and it also, you can filter it over to prospects too. But this business, the biggest challenge that advisors always face, and they always come in and they talk to me on this podcast, and I talk to out in the industry. I say, what's your biggest challenge? And their first answer is always growth. Growth. And
Right.
I would argue that even if we gave them all the growth in the world, I think that there's biggest challenges, processes, and understanding and managing that growth. But it's
Sure.
growth, right?
Yeah.
That's any business. So what are like 2 or 3 ways that people can take this idea of communication of the why or the for the prospect to help close more prospects and increase their close rate? Because I think that's a challenge on many advisors' minds right now.
Yeah. So actually, I came up with a formula that a financial advisor or a business owner could use to address that very challenge.
Okay, advisors love formulas.
Yeah. So the formula is this: when you're going through whatever the buying process is or the selling process is, from that initial conversation where you sit down with somebody for the very first time, they have very little insight as to who you are or how you go about doing what you're doing. From that very early conversation to, okay, sign on the dotted line, we're now joined at the hip and we're going to go at this together. There are steps that you have to walk through. And every step, you're asking the prospect that you're communicating with, you're asking them to change, okay? So the change may be, hey, give me 30 minutes of your time, right? And so human beings inherently are resistant to change. We don't like change. We like comfort. We like predictable. We like what we know. So in order to get a human being to change, and again, that at the end of this buying process, that's what the financial advisor is asking for. I want you to stop what you're doing over here, and I want you to start doing it over here. That's dramatic change. So here's the formula. The value of what you're communicating has to be greater than the ask in order for it to equal change.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Value has to be greater than the ask in order to equal change. So let's say in the first conversation, that very first conversation, you succeed in communicating some value. Well, now you're going to ask them for another meeting, right? And they're already starting to think about this is going to lead to change, right? If the value that you communicated in that conversation was not high enough and you put that ask out there, they're going to say no, right? You get to the end of this buying process. Again, it's true for every step that you go through. You have to communicate enough value, impart enough value in the conversation that you're having in order for them to, in order for you to put that ask out there. This was in another industry, but was working with a client. They said, hey, we're getting stuck at this stage of the buyer's journey. And I said, well, what are you asking for? And they go, well, it's after the second meeting, and we're asking for an $80,000 to $120,000 engagement. I was like, after the second meeting? Yeah. I said, that's way too, I know that you guys can communicate value because we've worked on that, but that's way too big of an ask. You need an interim step before that big ask. And they're like, well, what would be an interim step? And I'm going, why don't you do so they're a marketing firm. I said, why don't you do a positional analysis, competitive analysis in the marketplace for that prospect, and then come back to them with that analysis. It's another way for them to have even more of an experience with you,
right? And
to see the value that you're able to deliver. They came back to me about 6 weeks later. They said, we've already closed 2 deals because of using this interim step. So again, the formula is value has to be greater than the ask that you're putting in front of a prospect in every stage in order for them to change, in order for them to do whatever it is that you're asking them to do.
Okay, so I'm going to dig, and I'm going kind of deep on this, and it's just because my mind is linear. I think linearly in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So value, I understand, is how it's all in the eyes of the. I mean, it's perception, right? The value I think I'm providing, I think, is a lot higher value than probably what you are perceiving it to be.
Well, there's a yes and a no to that. Okay.
Okay.
So
Let's go down that.
Daniel Kahneman.
Yep.
Brilliant behavioral psychologist. He wrote a book, bestseller, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
Yep.
What a lot of people don't know is he actually, more famous than that, he won a Nobel Prize in economics in 2002. Behavioral psychologist wins a Nobel Prize in economics. That's unheard of. The reason that he won the Nobel Prize, if you want to skinny it down, is he broke the code on how human beings perceive value. Now, yes, you're right. The end result of this mechanism that he identified is highly personal and individual for every human being. But the way that they get to that individual perception of value is the same for you and I and for every other human being that walks on the planet. And here's how that shows up. I already alluded to it and kind of hinted to it earlier in the conversation. Value is perceived in a contrasting worldview. It's literally, this is what your world looks like without my product or service, and this is what your world could look like with my product or service. And it's however dramatic that contrast can be is going to determine the perception of value.
Okay, so let's dig into that for a second. And Daniel Kahneman, if you haven't read Thinking Faster and Slow, I would encourage you to get the Cliff Notes.
Yeah,
I started reading it. It's an amazing book, but it's a tough book.
It is.
But he is an amazing mind and brilliant. So, in theory, if I'm hearing this the right way, right, you're saying that, and how we can kind of relate it back to a financial advisor or the industry is say, okay, today your world is you are able to do X, Y, and Z. You're able to travel to once a year, you work 45 hours a week and everything of that nature. In my scenario, based on what we would be able to help you with, is I think that we can help you now travel 3 times a year and work, and you can continue to work 45 hours, but you're going to get that extra 2 travels.
Yeah.
this is where you are, and everybody would strive to be in this new, perceived, better world of how the position is. That the
That's a
that's
good
a very
first.
linear.
Yeah, that's a good first stab at it. But for that,
I appreciate
this
you
is
being kind and
yeah.
laid me down. Thank you.
For that, this is what your world looks like. I wouldn't necessarily go to, hey, you work 45 hours a week and you can take one trip. I would also talk about the difficulty in how hard it is to take that one trip. What are the challenges? What are the things that you're facing? What are the hurdles that you're having to overcome to even do that? Because what you want to do is in creating this contrast, there's also an opportunity to evoke emotion. And emotion is huge. Again, two other brilliant behavioral psychologists, one in 2002 and one in 2004, proved what we've long suspected about human behavior, and that is we make decisions based on meaning and emotion and then justify it with logic and reason. Okay? So, and by the way, there's a whole other story behind that, but we won't get into that right now.
I mean, we could have a whole other podcast on behavioral psychology. I love it.
Yeah. So this equation over here, this is what your world looks like. You want them to feel the emotional impact of their current state, right? So what does it mean that you can only take your family 1 week out of the year? How does that impact your family? How does that impact your spouse? So there's all kinds of questions that you can ask to let them really feel the emotional impact of where they are today. And then when you flip the conversation, you go, what if you could? And then you start painting this picture of this world that they could have with you, right? What if you could take 3 to 4 trips every year? What if you could deepen your relationship with those rebellious teenagers because you're in this environment that allows you to do that? And that's the other important thing in this equation for financial advisors. And I think for the most part, they do a really good job of it, finding out what's important to their client. What are they trying to accomplish? And then ask, and this goes back to the Simon Sinek thought leadership, ask why is that important, right? So go deep, go as deep as you can. And again, none of these conversations or none of what we're talking about has anything to do with all of the mechanisms and the financial machinery back here that is going to facilitate that. Because again, they don't really care about this, right? That's kind of table stakes. If you're a financial advisor, you have to be able to talk about the world that you live in. Those are table stakes.
And I think that's the challenge that faces financial advisors is that EQ kind of challenge of being able to emotionally connect and understand and have those deep conversations, because I think that too many financial advisors say, well, you know what, I don't want to go too deep with them. Like, I just want to stay up here.
Right.
But if you do get deeper with them, the relationship, and I see it as well when I was managing individual clients, it's a changed relationship. I had clients where we were on the surface, and I had clients where we were deep, where I knew everything about them, and they knew stuff about me.
Right.
The clients that know everything about me and that I go deep with on them, and I was able to emotionally connect with are the bigger ones. And I think that's the challenge that we have to help advisors get over to be able to be better closers, better salespeople, but also better stewards to their clients going forward. So I want to touch on I want to touch on 2 more things before we flip over to buy sell. Okay. One is social media. So we're talking about a lot of this of how to communicate in person and talk with people. Social media is something that's kind of taboo to talk about in the financial advisory world, right? Financial advisors don't think that it works for getting clients because we're a service-based relationship business. But in reality, social media works, and it can help to get new prospects, close new prospects, and deepen relationships with current clients.
Right.
Using these types of conversations of how to deliver value, let's go on the how here for a second. How can advisors better leverage these insights to utilize social media to help with getting new clients and deepening relationships with current clients?
Yeah. Well, so it still comes back to the value equation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not enough, and I'm actually going to rag on my financial advisor a little bit. So I get I think it's a weekly newsletter, and it's typically, hey, here's what's going on with the market. And I'm like, okay, well, I could get that, in any kind of news feed as to what's going on with the market. And so from a social media standpoint, again, it comes back to value. You want to find ways to communicate and share content that would represent value to whoever your constituency is. And that's a really, really important point. We haven't really touched on that. So as a financial advisor, who is your ideal client? Who are you trying to market to, right? You have to understand their world. And again, I gave the example of a divorcee or a widower. That makes it very easy to identify what kind of social media content should I be creating for the constituency that I serve, right? If you don't understand your constituency and who you're going after, if you don't understand their world, you're never going to be able to create content that's relevant and impactful to them. Now, as far as the content that you post, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever the social media it is, it has to represent value. There has to be something unique to it and something that represents value. So focus on the challenges that your constituency face. What are some of the things that they're bumping up against? What do you hear more times than not when you're talking to your existing clients that represent real challenges? Hold those challenges out in social media and then give them a quick, again, what if you could do this instead? What if these possibilities were available to you?
You're asking them to give up 5 minutes, 10 minutes of their time to either watch your video, read your blog, whatever, listen to your podcast, and there better be enough value for that ask, right? And so that's a small ask, but there's so much there. They get so much content in their face that they better have some value there. And it, like you said, it goes back to the equation, which I love that equation, in terms of determining whether they're going to read it or not. And if you're just putting out whether you should do a Roth or a traditional, there's millions of those articles out there. Give me something that's of value that's going to make it worth me spending 5 minutes of my time to read it or watch it.
So I'll give you another quick example. I was thinking about this when I was running this morning.
There you go. Barefoot.
So I have, my kids are, 25 to 30. I've got 4 kids, 4 adult kids. When they were in their early 20s, I could see them struggling with budget. Just establishing a budget, even when they got into their first job, how to manage their money. Well, for most financial advisors, my kids would not be a very lucrative target for them to go after until maybe 10 years from now or 5 years from now, or my oldest son gets into baseball and he starts making some serious money. The point that I'm making there is that if I were trying to build a financial advisory practice and I was going after people in their early 20s, I'd be talking about the challenges of managing their money, and then offering up tips and insights and suggestions on how they can better plan their money, budget their money. And again, that's just one small example, but that would come from knowing these are the people that I'm going after. This is my target audience. And then understanding what are articles that are being written about this demographic? What are the challenges that they're facing financially? What are some ideas or thoughts that I can hold out to them on a regular basis that would help them start to chip away at those challenges?
Yeah, and I think that, what you're alluding to a little bit earlier is like understanding your clients a little bit better. I think that that's something that advisors have to get better at, right? We used to segment our clients based on AUM, or assets under management, and say, all right, well, here's our under $1 million clients, here's our $1 million to $3 million, here's our $3 million to $5 million, and that's how people used to segment. We got to change that and say, here are all the people that like to travel. Here are all the people that like sports. Here are the people that want to spend time with their family. Here are the people that want charities. And then you can direct more value and content towards those people. And so you have to rethink the way that you segment your clients, which means that, we're probably going to have to do a little bit more work to figure that out. Ask the right questions, surveying, following on social media, connecting with their clients deeper. And it may be a little bit more difficult than just looking at what they're letting you manage in their portfolio. And so that's, I think, a takeaway I got there. So last 2 questions. You have a book. You're in the process of writing a book, and kudos to you. I've written a book before. It did not sell like hotcakes, so don't take any advice from me. I got plenty of copies. I give them away for free to Goodwill and everything of that nature. Tell us about the book. What is it about that you're writing towards, and who's it targeted for?
So it would be targeted for really any business owner or anybody that's involved in selling a product or a service, right? The focus of the book, and actually the title of the book, unless I change it before the final edit, is 6X Convert More Prospects to Customers.
Okay.
One of the questions that you asked me earlier, right? How do you convert more of those opportunities, more of those prospects into actual paying customers? And where the 6X came from, worked with a software company here in Atlanta. They were having challenges with the first conversation. They were only converting about 8% of those conversations into the next stage of their sales process. After using the principles that we've touched on here today, some of the things that we've talked about, built basically a playbook for that first call. 1 quarter later, their conversion rate went to 47%.
Wow.
More than 6 times the
Wow.
what they were experiencing. So really, the focus of the book is really those early stage conversations that you're having with a prospect, and the things that should be showing up in those conversations. There's even a framework that I hold out to them. Here's a roadmap that any business owner could use to create a high value conversation, because that first conversation, it's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make a good impression, you don't communicate value, you don't build some trust and credibility in that first conversation, there's no second, right? So the book really does focus on those early stage conversations, really like 1, 2, and 3. For every industry and for every business, what happens in those first 3 conversations is a little bit different, but there are, again, behavioral psychology principles. There's some very specific processes and a roadmap that I walk them through in the book. So it's a self-help book. Mm-hmm. If you're a business owner and you want to know how to build those early stage conversations and how to execute those to build credibility and trust and communicate high value, the book would be worth a read.
I'm excited about it, and I hope you will let us know so we can promote it to our listeners when it does come out from that standpoint. So last question before we get to buy, sell, and before Marissa comes out here and hits me up top of the head because I can continue to talk. So we talked a lot about financial advisors, and I always ask this question, and you're coming from a different seat, but you've worked with financial advisors, and that's why I'm interested in your perception of it. Where do you see this industry in 10 years?
I think there's going to be a lot of disruption through the use of artificial intelligence and all of this data that we have at our fingertips. And so I don't know what that disruption is going to look like in the financial advisor's world. But I'll throw out a what if. What if this technology starts to make the investment strategies and the things that individuals are wanting to accomplish financially, what if it makes it easier for them? Because we're already seeing a lot of self-serve, right? That's been around for about 20 years now, 15, 20 years, where you've got a lot of people that are just, they're doing it on their own. They're not using an advisor. So where I see this going for financial advisors is that emotional element that we were talking about earlier, the ability to connect with people, emotionally, and to build these strong relationships. I think that's going to become even more important.
Yeah.
And I think where that's going to take the industry is that word advisor. It's going to be more dominant than financial. Okay, so it's not financial advisor, it's financial advisor. And so being able to bring that advisory skill to your clients in the next 10 years is going to be critical. They should be thinking about you first when they have an important life decision. And it may not even be a direct tie to something that would be financially impactful to them. It may be a career decision. It may be something else. So the more value that an advisor can add, I think is going to be it's going to be key. It's going to be critical in order to continue to succeed.
I love that. I am so in line with you on that, and I think it's such an interesting perspective from someone that's not in the industry, because usually we have a lot of people from the industry, a lot of people out of the industry, but I think that's why technology needs to enable advisors to be able to take off those menial tasks of managing money, asset allocation, financial planning, task management, because the time that's needed to have those deep conversations and emotional conversations and getting deep into that, that's a lot of time. And if you're spending time, 50% of your time doing a conversation about the investments and all that type of stuff and planning for that, you don't have the ability of planning and having that deeper conversation. And if you do, then you're not able to expand your book of business, which then means that you're not growing, which means that you're not.
Right.
It all is a domino effect.
It
is. And if you can use technology to get time back, so you can spend more time with more people and having those conversations, then you're now helping impact and provide fulfillment to more people to have a better life. And that's what it's all about to be a financial advisor.
It is.
And so I love that. I'm all on board. I'm on that 10-year train. I'm on David Kurkjian's 10-year train on that side. All right, let's get into buy-sell. Buy-sell is a cheesy game I put together to loop in a little bit of financial stuff with some interesting takes from that standpoint.
Sure.
I'll say a comment. You say buy if you think it's true, sell if you think it's false. And then you can kind of give a quick sentence or two of why you believe that. All right. So, and some of these may be softballs for you, but I always like to make it a little bit easier on my guests so that they come back. Buy or sell. Financial advisors should be leveraging social media to create deeper connections with current clients.
Buy. Buy.
Explain.
Yeah. So any opportunity to touch, and when I say touch, it's communicate with your constituency, with your clients and prospects. Again, the value that's represented in them working with you. One of the most precious commodities in today's world is to get somebody's attention. Because we're bombarded with all this information and all this content, and so if you have the opportunity to get somebody's attention in your constituency and communicate something of value, it's critical. So definitely buy.
Love it. Buy or sell, and this kind of goes up to your 10-year future. Artificial intelligence solutions can help advisors communicate their value to clients.
Sell.
All right. I was way off there. Why?
Well, I
can see why. It's a little bit different than your tenure.
Yeah. So if you were telling me artificial intelligence can help them serve their clients, I would have gone by.
Okay.
But when you're saying communicate, no, because the communication does need to be personal. I'm dealing with this with other industries. There's technology out there that can run campaigns inside of LinkedIn that looks like it's a human being, right? As far as getting the messaging and all that. But most human beings, when they read it, they find things that are off-putting. Well, why did they say that? That's not the right way to say. And so they start to tell pretty quickly, this is a machine communicating with me. This is not a human being. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The advisor part is so personal. The communication has to be personal. It has to be genuine.
Yeah.
And I don't know of any technology out there that can replicate that.
I can see that. I agree with that. I think that's a good one.
Okay.
Buy or sell. The financial advisory industry lags in their ability to communicate value relative to other service-oriented industries.
So I would come down right in between.
All right, you're a hold.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have buy, sell, hold because it's too many words, but buy.
It would be a hold because, again, in 7 years, MasterMessaging, I've worked with over 120 different companies. They all face the same challenge, communicating value.
Okay.
And so every now and then you run across a company or an industry that's doing really well, but I don't see the financial advisors as being worse or better. So
that's music to financial advisors' ears out there listening. Congratulations. Buy or sell, and I think that we know where we're going with this one. The majority of communication in 5 years will be in other ways outside of in-person communication, face-to-face.
Sell.
Yep.
It may be in other industries, but for this industry, no, that would be a definite sell. It needs to be personal.
And that's another music to ears of financial advisors, because I think that early on in the robo world, people were fearful that technology was going to take over their job, and I think we're now making that transition of the pendulum moved over to advisors seeing that the technology will augment them, not replace them.
Right.
And I think that that's a really good thing. So, all right, buy, sell. It looks like I built you up to be a little bit of a bear. You're leaning a little bit bearish. That's okay. We allow bears back. So next time, I teed you up for that. So I apologize.
Okay.
All right. Let's go into a closing thought with you for 90 seconds or so, and then I'll do a closing thought, and then we'll get back to our day.
Sounds good.
All right. So I'll tee this up, and you can go one direction or another. But one thing that a financial advisor, from our conversation and from your background, can take away and go and implement somehow tomorrow and better themselves and better their firm and push them ahead.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this. I'd have to imagine that most financial advisors get a good bit of their business through referrals, right? So you have an existing client, they have a deep trust in the relationship, and financial advisors, again, from time to time will be like, hey, who do you know that could benefit from this similar type of relationship? So I would suggest that they take it one step further, and this has been kind of a common theme for our talk today. I would go back to the clients that have said, yeah, I'd be happy to refer you, or clients that have, over time referred other people to you. Go back to those individuals and ask them, why were you comfortable referring these people to me? And what you should be looking for is a common thread. What are some of the common themes that you're hearing and what they're feeding back to you? And if they just say, because I trust you, I would push on that. Okay, so where did that trust come from? So the takeaway from today would be to understand why your clients are comfortable doing business with you, why they would be willing to refer other people to you, and then let that be the core of any messaging or communication that you create going forward. This is how you're going to get to the uniqueness of what you bring to your relationships in your business. And uniqueness is so important in a commoditized world because as human beings, and again, this is all over behavioral psychology, we're constantly looking for outliers. What's different? You walk into a room, whether you know it or not, you're trying to figure out what's different, what doesn't belong here, what's standing out, what's unique. And the same thing's going to be true in any conversation. So going back to the gentleman that I made reference to earlier that serves divorcees and widowers, again, he's really clear about his why. And that comes out in all of the conversations that he has, and people just experience that, and it allows him to have the success that he's looking to have. So my takeaway from today would be understand why your clients do business with you, and then let that be the centerpiece of the communication and the conversations that you have with your prospects.
And that's a tough conversation. It can be a tough conversation for advisors to have, but I think you're right. It's a necessary one because if you don't ask them, you're never going to truly know.
Right.
And sometimes people don't want to hear what their client may have to say, or may stir the pot to where they now are starting to think, well, why am I? I don't know why why I like you so much. And then, and financial advisors are very cognizant of that. And so but I agree. I think that it's time to be comfortable being uncomfortable a little bit. Doing that.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, so my closing thought for the awkward moment of the podcast for David here today is that we talk a lot about, on this podcast, financial advisors. And the biggest risk in the future isn't that we will have fee compression and have to lower our fee or our AUM fee, how we charge it, but rather margin compression. Financial advisors are going to be forced to provide more services, value, and servicing to their clients. And in order to keep healthy margins in the business, advisors will have to find ways to be more efficient and scalable. And we will be forced to ensure they correctly communicate their value to clients. Too often in the industry, we have struggled with communicating the value we provide to our clients. As advisors, we provide more value than just an asset allocation and choosing the right securities. We provide the sounding board to help keep individuals from being too greedy when things are great or selling at the bottom when things are falling off a cliff. Showing this type of value is hard. So the challenge is, how do we change the conversation with our clients to minimize the focus on the natural market fluctuations to help clients keep their eyes on the larger picture and off the day-to-day volatility? It's a matter of changing the conversation from stocks and bonds to fulfillment. What do clients want to do when they retire? What do they want to enjoy while they're raising their kids? What drives them day in and day out? What charities do they wish they could interact with more? These are questions that can be tough to tackle with clients if they only see you as the, quote, stock person. But these are the conversations that will expose what truly matters to your clients, and it will allow you an opportunity to build a plan that serves their wants and desires while helping to ensure the strategy allows them to have money tomorrow while still enjoying their needs today. If an advisor is able to have these types of conversations, like Dave and I have talked about, that strike a true nerve with their clients and are things they can wrap their heads around today, then showing value is simple. Just point to the trip they were able to take, or the tuition they were able to pay for, or the charity they were able to donate to. Whether the market is up or down, you are delivering value in an easy to understand way. And that's one way to change the conversation and focus on the value our clients desire. David, thanks again for coming down. I really appreciate that conversation, and I think our listeners did too.
You're welcome.
So let's do it again. When the book comes out, let's talk all book.
Okay, we'll do it.
And to all the listeners out there, thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to listen in to Bridging the Gap, and we'll be in your ears again next week. Awesome.